Welcome to another episode of A Sip of Sunshine. This is the podcast where we talk all things SEND and we get to know the people who are making a difference. This month, I have a very important topic to cover, the pending SEND reform. And I've got one of our fantastic consultants with me, Gabby. Gabby is our SEND Consultancy Manager. Morning, Gabby.
Good morning.
How are you?
Oh, we said that at the same time. Yeah, all good, thank you. All good. All
Great
good. How are
minds
you?
know that. I'm all right. I'm okay. It's a bit warm. We were just talking about that. It's warm where I am in the Midlands. Not so warm where you are, but very hot in your climate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is tropical. Anything above 18, tropical. Hence the jumper.
And then, me, I'm just ready for the beach.
Got a nice beach here, but it is the North Sea, so
Beautiful.
pretty chilly.
It's a beautiful beach. I really love it there. I could live up there for sure. If it wasn't so far out of the way, like next to Scotland, then I could definitely live there. But Gabby, for those who haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, okay. How much do you want to know? And what am I not allowed to say?
Well, listen, we can cut stuff, all right? So
Amazing. Right, okay. So I feel like that episode on the Goonies where he starts off when I was 3. Originally a teacher in nursery in Birmingham. Just so that everybody out there knows, I never wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a vet. I don't know how I ended up in teaching. That is a very confusing story, but I did and actually really loved it. I actually started off as a nursery nurse in the old days of nursery nursing. Then took a long time to get my teaching degree. So I was sort of on and off. I did a 4-year PG, not a PGC, what was it at the time? A B Ed. And then gave up after 3 years and possible ADHD brain right there. And then went and did the graduate teaching program, worked for a little bit as a nursery nurse, went and did the graduate teaching program, and then ended up as an unqualified teacher doing my thing in nursery. Qualified, moved to Sunderland and was on supply for a little while and was asked to go and do some supply in the language provision. Maintained I didn't want to do SEN, didn't want to be pigeonholed into SEN. I wanted to keep my options open. Long story, but accidentally ended up staying in the language provision for 15 years. And then for various reasons, ended up coming to Sunshine Support for help and advice, both professionally and personally. And then one day, in the midst of all sorts of personal things with my own child, applied for the job. And that's how I'm here. Ta-da!
I love that.
Very long and confusing and roundabout story of how I'm here and what I'm doing at Sunshine Support.
Well, I think also, though, it's quite typical in some ways in the fact that so many of us didn't necessarily have this as our end goal, but how everything sort of aligned to make it happen. You know, there'll be elements of everything that you did. And also, like you said, you know, it highlights bits within yourself where, you know, after 3 years, I'm getting out of here. I'm not going to finish that yet, which is just so typical of something I would do. And then you start to understand things from a different point of view. And then again, you know, being a SEND parent or, you know, having experiences with your own children where you're thinking, I need a slightly different approach to what the textbook or traditions are. And I think it all leads us back to this very lovely therapeutic way of working, whether that's as a parent, as a professional. And I think it's really lovely. And I think, you know, you tell us, what has drawn you when you said, you were, I'm not going to work in SEND, that's just not what I'm going to be doing. And then it's like, oh my God, I love this. Was there a particular person? Was there a moment where you were like, no, this is what I want to do, that this is why I'm being drawn to helping these particular learners?
Oh, wow, that's such an interesting question. And as you were asking that question, I don't have this is another aside, I don't have an inner monologue, so I didn't think this in words, but I thought it in pictures. I had a vision of a particular day in the language provision. So I remember I was still on supply at the time, and I was working with the most incredible teaching assistant. She was, oh my goodness, she's not with us anymore, sadly, but she was my right-hand woman for many, many years and taught me everything I know about SEN. And we were in the language provision on this one particular day, still on supply, and the school I was working at the time was receiving a high number of inspections because of its category.
Okay.
And we were delivering the curriculum. Historically, in the language provision, it was being delivered in a way that I didn't necessarily feel was right, but I didn't know why, because I didn't understand DLD in the way that I do now. I just knew it didn't feel right for those children. And I remember sitting down after that day and having a conversation with the speech and language therapist that I worked with at the time, who I'm still very good friends with, and this teaching assistant, Marcia. And we sat and had a conversation and said we needed to deliver that lesson differently, but I really don't want to deliver it in the way that we're being restricted into delivering it. So I said, okay, let's do it this way. So we spent that evening completely transforming our classroom into an under the sea environment. And this is what I'm picturing. So when I said I was picturing this moment, I remember we were all up ladders, we were hanging things from the ceiling, we were creating this continuous provision with sand and water. And this was for year 6 children as well. And we delivered that lesson that we'd done that day in the way that I wanted to. But Ofsted walked in at that moment while we were trialling. So why we thought trialling this in the middle of an Ofsted inspection would be a good idea, I have no idea. But anyway, they did. And you know what? We got outstanding. We got a judgment of outstanding, and we got personally mentioned in the Ofsted report. And that was the life-changing moment where I thought, you know what? This is where I want to be. I want to be delivering an education for children that meets their needs. And I don't want to be restricted, and I don't want to be constrained by the mainstream curriculum because it doesn't work. And that is that moment.
I love that. And we've spoken about this personally before, where we've said like autonomy has been removed from teaching. Many, many years ago, teachers were trusted to do the job. They've had the training. The majority of them have this enormous amount of experience, and they were trusted to get a good job done. And it was all done through performance management, Nowadays, it's not like that. Everything is so scripted. Everything is so tick box driven. So it really removes that creativity from the workforce, from the teachers, And I think that we went to see Concilium Evolve, which is a fantastic provision up in Sunderland a few weeks ago. And when we sort of said to them, are you sticking to the curriculum? And they said, absolutely, we're just doing it in our way. So we're still ticking every box, but we're making sure that it's being delivered in the way that the learner needs it to be delivered in. Still makes the outcomes the same. They're exceptional outcomes. They're much better than if they were in a mainstream. So what you've done there is you've just looked at the learners, looked at your cohort and gone, right, how are they going to receive this information in the best way? And then delivered it. And let's be fair, everybody loves an immersive experience. So if you're creating immersive experiences in learning, I mean, it's just brilliant. So I can see how you've ended up here. So let's talk about what on earth is going on in terms of a possible SEND reform. Gabby will explain a bit more to us. So, Gabby, we are seeing headlines almost daily now about the SEND reforms or the overhaul that they're promising us. We know that we've asked quite a lot as a community, but I'm not sure that what they're leaking out there matches with the things that are being asked of them. Nothing official has come from the DV, from what I can see. But what have you been seeing and hearing about? What have you been reading?
There just seems to have been a lot of sound bites, a lot of it's rumblings, isn't it? There's nothing specific, but certainly the key themes seem to be very much centred around EHCPs, funding, and potentially the replacement of EHCPs with ARP provisions, which I know we can potentially discuss a little bit more. And then the removal of the tribunal process. Again, all sound bites, nothing confirmed. So it's very difficult really to unpick really which direction they're heading in, and we are kind of guessing at the moment, but yeah.
It's really tricky because we've heard there was there's a number of SEND advisors who are not necessarily official ministers or anything, but they've sort of had these very irresponsible interviews on big stages where they've leaked information. And part of me thinks, and I've talked about this before, part of me thinks, were they just really irresponsible, or were they planted there to see what the reaction was? And I've likened it before to my favourite programme, Gavin and Stacey, where it was leaked a few years, well, it was just over a year ago. It was leaked that there might be a Christmas special. It wasn't leaked. That's how they were gauging the public response. And I'm wondering whether it's the same sort of thing. But it does seem to be scaremongering. And I think that let's start at talking about the removal. And this is, of course, not set in stone. We've not had anything that tells us it's set in stone. But there are a lot of discussions and rumours about EHCPs being removed from mainstream kids. You know, talk to us about that. What have you read? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly that. So what we are reading at the moment is that they are considering, and again, all rumour, but they are considering removing EHCPs, or don't even know whether it would be removing, just not producing any more EHCPs for our mainstream children, and that children in special schools would be the children that had the EHCPs, which blows my mind, because surely the children in special schools are the ones getting the provision that they need, and the children in mainstream schools may be the ones that need those additional documents to fully enforce the provision that they need if they're in mainstream. It just seems incredulous that they would be doing it in such a back to front way to me. And I can speak as having been a mainstream teacher, and you know, I think in a special school with specialist skills and specialist staff, you kind of have an understanding of what needs to be delivered because it's your bread and butter. Mainstream don't, and so they need those EHCPs to tell them what they need to deliver, and it just, honestly, it's blowing my mind, Chrissa, daily.
It's a bit weird, like you said. You know, when let's break it down a little bit. When you go to a specialist school, and I've had one of my children in a very very specialist school that was a 52-week waking day provision, all residential, a bit of a Hogwarts. It was absolutely out of the world. We've spoken about it before because our lovely Kelly Jarvis was the head teacher there, and I absolutely loved that provision. But whatever was in my daughter's plan didn't necessarily matter because it was all covered under their offer, their core offer. They had speech and language on site. They had a big team of them. They had psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric nurses all on site. They had specific neurodivergent focused counsellors and psychotherapists all on site on tap. So having that in the plan didn't necessarily matter, although it was in there anyway, because it was all offered as part of the core offer. Now, why did my daughter need that provision? Because she'd never received any type of specialist provision in a mainstream, because I didn't know any of this existed back then. We're talking 10 plus years ago. So I had no idea. We were still in statement territory. The EHCPs were not necessarily a thing. They were just coming out 10 years ago. And so actually, had I understood it, had somebody been forthcoming and said, actually, we've noticed your child is incredibly intelligent, but she can't make friends. There seems to be a disjoint there. Let's look a little bit further into that. They didn't have the skill set, and that's okay. But how much cheaper would it have been for the council if her needs had been identified sooner and met sooner in a mainstream provision? Because academically, she was the top of the class. She was your level 9 GCSE student. No use to her. She couldn't leave the house. So, because of anxiety. So looking at things at a more local level, surely, if we were to go and look past the fiscal 4 years of somebody being in power, this is going to cost the country less long term to have the provisions in the EHCP delivered in a mainstream setting. Now, skip forward to my other daughter. I've got 4, as you know, but I've got 2 with an EHCP. Skip forward to this one. She got an EHCP age 5. We have kept her in mainstream. She has had bespoke, very, very strategic, targeted interventions in speech and language. She has DLD. She is now like a different child when it comes to her language. She's confident. My word, I can't shut her up. She's more of a talker than I am. But I think it's really important that we use these 2 case studies actually, because my elder daughter, she was 13 before she got her EHCP. My younger, age 5. 2 very different experiences for a number of reasons, very different profiles. But we are keeping that younger child, who's now going up to senior school, in mainstream with this fantastic intervention.
Yeah, I mean, we are starting to see small things happening that make me think that there is some overhaul coming of some sort, whether we like it or not. There's something on the cards. And I agree with you. I think these sound bites have probably been planted to gauge public reaction, because what the government aren't going to want to do is do U-turns, because we know what happened in the last government. U-turns became probably part of their downfall. So this government are not going to want to U-turn on things. So they're going to put things out there into the ether and see what the reaction is. But what I think we can safely say is that they are definitely going to do some form of overhaul of the system. I don't know whether the fact that they're talking about removing EHCPs, or I don't necessarily mean removing EHCPs from the children that've got them, because I don't know how lawful that would be. But the removal of the EHCP system potentially is maybe what they're thinking about. I think there's credibility in the fact that we've got people like Bridget Phillipson going and visiting provision, as we've read, which, as we know, really, really did enrage me because of the language that was being used around that visit with mainstream schools managing SEND children. So I certainly, it's sometimes it's actions speak louder than words. And I think sometimes we're not hearing specific things. We're not hearing statements from the government, but what they're doing is telling us certain things. And the fact that she's out there visiting additional resource provisions, visiting schools, it certainly makes me feel as though there's something is underway. And then we've also got the recent bill that's been going through about initial teacher training as well. That makes me think that they're definitely looking at a more. I say this really because I'm old, and I remember going from, I remember when they were having this whole conversation 25 years ago about we need inclusion in mainstream schools.
Yeah.
And then look where we've ended up, because it's people's interpretation of inclusion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Inclusion
Yeah.
doesn't just mean that your child goes into a mainstream setting and is included. That's not what inclusion's about. But that's what I feel. That's how I feel we're heading at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I feel for the schools that she went into, because they're in a really vulnerable position, because they know that they've got somebody official, so they've got to show their best. They've got to be on their best performance. So at no point was she going to see a weak spot there. Okay, there will be an element of performance. We know that. They're on TV. She's got a whole PR crew there. Not entirely fair on anyone, because you're not going to have a teacher sit there and say, we're really struggling, because then you're going to get all the parents knocking at the door saying, what do you mean you're struggling? I thought we were all right. Do we have a reason to be worried? They really are in a very difficult position.
So what is school avoidance? Now, a lot of people call this school refusal, and it's really important that we reframe how we look at this, because actually our children aren't refusing to attend school, they're actually unable to attend school. Now, if a child was...
It's a powerful letter with a peppy sound that pops up in some of our favourite words. As we continue our reading adventure, we'll discover how the letter P helps us describe all sorts of things. Get ready for a perfect and playful journey.
To get excellent outcomes for their young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And what this means is that I get to see lots of different graduated response.
Meet our neighbours in space, the planets of the solar system. We live on Earth, but we're part of a much bigger family. There are 8 planets that all orbit or travel around the sun. Let's start with the closest
How to teach our children and young people the skills they need to regulate their own behaviour, but in a way that really meets them where they are, rather than encouraging them to mask their behaviour so that the adults around them find them easier to manage. We hope you find this course super interesting and that you get lots out of it. So without further ado, let's go on to the first module.
But definitely, because I would find it very, very difficult to see how, if you were in the process of an EHCNA request, if it's been turned down and you're in the appeal process, if you're already in that process and you've been refused to issue and you're in the appeal process, or if you've got a plan and you're not happy with BF and I, which are parts of the EHCP, and you're in the appeal process. I don't see how, and I don't know if you think differently, but how could they stop those tribunals from happening? Because it's part of the legal process at the moment. So, and that can't be changed quickly. So, if you're considering an EHCP, or if you're in any of those processes, absolutely get them in, or get your appeals lodged, because I just can't see how they'd have to honour those, is what I think. Yeah. I'm not a lawmaker, so I don't know. They could they could do something completely arbitrary that really surprises us, but I just think they would have to honour what is already in the system.
Yeah. Well, you look at any sort of rules, like if you were going to a shop and buying something in the sale, there is a cut-off point. Pre-sale, sale, post-sale, and your terms and conditions of purchase of business applies to whichever area of time, period of time that you purchased within. And surely this is the same. And going back to the SEND reform of 2014, that took a long time to get from statements of SEN to EHCPs, an update of the SEND Code of Practice. There was a lot to that, a lot of consultation. And it's not just with parents and professionals, but they also have a lot of barristers consult in to the government. And these are barristers who are working on the front line, because I know quite a few of them that consulted in. And I think that the SEND reform 2014, it took 4 years for us to properly roll it out. Local authorities, give or take a year after that point, were pretty much up to speed with the conversion of statements to EHCPs. This is not going to be a short-term thing. This is going to be a long-term thing. And I would like to think, and again, I'm not a policymaker, I'm not a law changer or anything, but if they decided today to change it, it's not going to happen today. It's going to be another 2 years of consultation, then another year of trying to work out how they're going to change it. Nobody moves very quickly in the public sector. And then another 4-year rollout. So the kids who it's affecting now won't be probably in the system.
What I am hearing a lot of, and I don't know, this might be something that we want to talk a little bit more about in a second, but what I am hearing a lot about is parents and families are coming back to this notion of inclusion a lot, and I had a really good conversation with a client this morning that actually talks as much as we do. She's absolutely fabulous and I love her, and she's one of these people you can just put the world to rights with. And we were talking about the fact that these sound bites about we need our mainstream schools to be more inclusive, we need education to be inclusive, we need our SEND children to feel included, inclusion. Okay, that's fine. However, we don't need to change the law then, because ultimately, if we get inclusion right in schools, in mainstream schools, through initial teacher training or whatever that looks like, if inclusion is right, then EHCP numbers by proxy will reduce.
Yeah.
The reason I think, and I don't know about you, and I know my clients for this, the reason EHCP numbers have climbed probably is, yes, to do with our understanding of SEN and how that's improved, but also because their mainstream settings are struggling to understand and meet need because of, for example, poor initial teacher training or whatever that looks like. But if the government's agenda were to get inclusion right and to get the curriculum right, then we don't need to change the law. Those are the conversations I've been having with clients, which probably has gone off on a tangent, but
no, I think it's spot on, because we've already sort of touched upon this. And I think, we've spoken before about I'm going to out local authorities now, and I'm not really I don't tend to do this, but I'm going to do it. So we represent a lot of families at tribunal. We have a lot of tribunals, and we try in all ways to try and avoid the tribunal. But what we're noticing is more and more local authorities like to go to tribunal because it buys them a little bit of extra time. If they go to tribunal, that's another year away quite often, and that means that's a year that they don't have to supply a provision for, which is saving them a budget, right? It's not ethical, but it's what they do. Let's just call it out for what it is. And this isn't about the SEND caseworkers. We learned from the last podcast that those decisions are being made much further up, and the SEND caseworkers are having to deliver this awful news that they don't agree with either. Now, one of the things that I have harped on about for at least the last 6 years, and been quite public in this, is that I think when we go to tribunal, we often see local authorities who have never taken a look at that bundle. They have not done any preparation. They hire an expensive barrister. There's always a budget for that, Gabby. There is always a budget for a legal team. And let's not forget, they spent nearly £100 million across the country on SEND tribunal representation. None of that's gone to the kids. And they lost, what was it, like 98% or 99% of cases local authorities are losing. So that is an absolute waste of money, right? We've got £100 million that we would love to have in our SEND budgets across the country, but instead it's gone to the big barristers. Anyway, love the barristers, by the way. We work with quite a few, so I'm not bashing them. They're just doing a job. But local authorities are allowing that money to be spent. Now, local authorities can go to tribunal with little evidence, little preparation, big budgets for legal people, and there is no penalty for them. I don't get that. So a parent, it's meant to be a parent-friendly process. Parents go along to a tribunal. They have to take representation because they're quite scared, because we know the other side have got a big-time barrister who's going to absolutely grill them. And some of them are really lovely. Some of them are not so lovely. And they can get quite nasty and personal. I know, because I've been on the receiving end of one, but I had representation. They still went for me. Now, you can go along to these things. The parents, this means everything to them. They are prepped. They have read every inch of that bundle. They have paid quite often for their private assessments because the local authority haven't even done an assessment. Yet it gets to tribunal. The parents win. They spent all this money. They don't feel like winners. Great that their child has got the outcome that they need, but they're absolutely broken. They're emotionally devastated. They're financially devastated. They are absolute, like, just a shadow of their former self. Now, where's the penalty for a local authority there? Because there's no incentive to get it right. They rock up, they do a bad job, they lose. Okay, no worries. We managed to dodge a bullet. We dodged a bit of budget there for a year. No worries, we'll start paying now. But there's no penalty. So the law is fabulous. IPSI have gone on record. They did the committee conversation, that's been published, and they said the law needs to remain. What needs to happen is that local authorities are held to account when they don't stick to the law. So now we're going to talk about what needs to change to make things better. Gabby, if you were in charge of this SEND reform, we're going to give you the job of a lifetime, right? What real changes would you make?
Okay, so we talk a lot about early intervention in schools. Yes, brilliant. But early intervention in teacher training. So it's got to start at the ground. Teachers, the code of practice says all teachers are teachers of SEN. I have yet to see that, and that's not. I'm not slating any teachers at all there. They will tell me they're not equipped. So teacher training has got to have a really solid focus on SEN, and I don't mean a half a day. I don't mean a 2-hour session on something. I mean they've got to know the law. The SEN co-qualification is obviously that was changing to become the level of the MPQH. I think that's yes, but you can be very well qualified, but not necessarily be able to do the job. So I think you've got to have a probationary period for SENCOs.
Yeah.
And then I think we should keep the law as it is. I think we should change the law on ARPs, but that's a whole other conversation as we've just kind of worked out, to bring it up to speed. But I think we should keep the law as it is, because I think then that training, if we were looking at training mainstream staff to be better equipped to support children with SEN, and say if the curriculum was made more developmentally appropriate. Yeah. I've just rewritten the curriculum as well within this.
Of course. Yeah.
Then we are going to have less need for EHCPs, and EHCPs will be there for the children that need them the most. We keep the law the same, and then we do exactly what you said. So I'm going to promote you to judge and jury at this point. So I'll be the Minister for Education, you can be the whole judge and jury, and you can basically sit there and go, local authority, you have not done what you should be doing, and the law, we're going to lock you up. I mean, essentially, I know that's all joking aside, I think then we've got to hold local authorities to account. Yeah. I don't know if fining them is the answer, because we don't want to take more money away from the system. So I don't know what that would look like, or what we could potentially do. I'm sure you've got some lovely ideas on that.
Well, I just think as a private business, if you say, for instance, now, right, I'm the director of this company. Now, if I have constant complaints about you not hitting deadlines or whatever, I'm going to be having serious words with you about your performance. So actually, I do think that we need to put a face on the front of this system. You know, if people are being asked to deliver a message they don't agree with, they should be given autonomy over the fact that, you know, are they there to do a job or are they there to just deliver a message? And in which case, tell them that to start with, because I think a lot of these SEND caseworkers are brought in and they think that they genuinely can make a difference. And then they realize they're beaten down by a system where they have no authority because they've got no autonomy. Same with teachers. But what
as well.
yeah, I think if those decisions are signed off, it's not the SEND caseworker who's signing those off, it's somebody further up. So if they're signing off a decision to delay a placement and break the law, then that's a performance issue. Because they're breaking the law. In any other job, that would be if you were breaking the law regularly in your job, you wouldn't have a job here.
Exactly.
So
And also,
that frustrates me.
Sorry. I know, and I'm just thinking, like, I would probably go even higher. I would probably say, well, okay, if you consistently don't meet an order or you don't follow the directions that tribunal set, then you end up in your own hearing with a judge. Yeah. But because otherwise, the local authority are marking their own homework.
Exactly. If it was a doctor or anybody else, they would be held to a higher account. They would be held to a higher standard. Doctors and police officers, they have to stand in front of panels themselves when they've done something wrong. And we need to be considering that this is wrong. This is where it is going wrong, is that they're seeing this as a business savvy decision rather than saying it's unlawful. It's wrong. And we need to stop seeing it as a money, because funding is always cited as a barrier. It's always cited as a reason, and the system is cited as this barrier. But there are people within the system. These are human-led decisions. These are not computer says no. These are humans that are creating these decisions. So when they're sitting on a panel, they need to sign to say, yes, if this is an unlawful decision, I'm happy to be, put over the coals or whatever the phrase is, whatever it is, I don't know.
Yes, that is it. Yeah, exactly. You sign something off, you are accountable and you answer to it. Yeah,
accountability.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Having these ARPs in schools, it just reminds me of it being a bit like a zoo, because they're seeing the kids who you've got two different types of children. Well, not two different types, loads of different types, but you can't call that a neurodiverse setting when you have the neurodivergent children in one end and then the neurotypical children, or the ones without the extra additional needs or whatever, in another part. And for me, I've seen them. I've seen some of them, particularly in secondary school, and I don't think it works, because they're seen as, oh, those lot in there, look at them, and they're knocking the window at them. That's like a zoo. That's not right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is segregation. That's exclusion. That's not inclusion. And, like good ARPs are your class. We were just class 20. We weren't the language unit. We weren't the language provision. We were just class 20. And actually, because we used to do some lovely fun things, we used to get the mainstream children going, can we come into your class for this? Can we, things like that. But I mean, what you're describing there is essentially rewriting the curriculum to make it developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
But not just the curriculum as in the learning curriculum, but the unwritten curriculum. Why are we obsessed with children walking down the corridor in lines, in file? That is about our need for order. But just because children are being noisy doesn't mean there's not order. I used to get frustrated when we used to tell children to be quiet in the dinner hall. Like, I used to do it. I used to go, shh, we need to, it's not playtime, indoor voices, but I think it's lunchtime. Let them just let off a bit of steam. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just chatting.
Exactly.
I mean, if somebody was doing a cartwheel, it was dangerous, and fair enough. Toes in milk, never a good thing. But definitely, we've got to be thinking about the way children are children, play, It's got to be playful. We've got to, as you say, connection is so important. And who better to connect with children? Because let's face it, our teenagers don't want to connect with us as parents always, do they? You know, it's like, oh, I don't want to talk to you, Mum. But what if they've got a teacher that's a great connection?
Yeah.
You know, like teachers are in such privileged positions to be able to connect. So think about what you were like as a teenager. I remember one of my students, I remember him hiding the rubber under his desk, and I'd seen him do it. I went over and said, "Can I have the rubber, please?" And he's like, "How do you know I've got that?" And I went, "Because I was your age once." And he just laughed at me. He said, "I thought you were going to say you got eyes in the back of your head." Now I went, "No, I haven't, definitely, and I've got terrible eyesight as well. But I just knew you've got the rubber and because it's exactly what I would have done." But why can't we tell children these things now, young people? But that is a beautiful description. I want to work at that school after Sunshine. I want to stay at Sunshine.
Yeah, you stay here. When you look at this, so you've got, let's say, £60,000 for a day placement with an independent school. Then you look at a council placement, which is like for specialists, let's call it 10, 12K per child without a one-to-one, right? We can be educating 5 times more children if we kept things in-house in the public sector. What are your thoughts on that? Because whenever I talk about it, it falls on deaf ears.
Okay. Oh, I can really sum that up in one sentence, which will be amazing for me. There is no one size fits all. Unless you have a range, you'll never meet people's needs. You've got to have a range of provision out there because there needs to be something for everybody. That is inclusion. Inclusion is not a perform. And you know, again, we've talked a lot about this. The government. When we think about where we started by talking about EHCPs and the government's sound bites. The government sound bites have all been about we need inclusion in mainstream school. But actually what we're talking about is not inclusion. Inclusion is having something available that meets everybody's needs. Ideally, those specialist schools is what every school should look like to be true inclusion. Maybe not realistic in terms of cost, I don't know, but maybe if they all were like that, we wouldn't have tribunals.
Well, we've come to an end. So thank you so much, Gabby. We covered so much, and I know that you'll be back for more anyway, because we've got much more to say on the matter. And I'm sure that there'll be some live streams and things as well as things progress, because we will be sharing our point of view. We've tried to remain balanced. It's really tricky the longer the time goes on to remain balanced and try and keep everybody calm, because we just don't have the answers, you know. But thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy.
Oh, no, thank you very much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of A Sip of Sunshine. I think we certainly put the world to rights. Please join us again next month where we will have another episode. And of course, if you need us, please do reach out. We can be reached on all the usual social media channels and on our website too. More information in the show notes.